This is the Work at Home Heroes podcast. Your host, Caitlin Pyle, digs deep with people from all over the world who make money from home. Get ready to wake up to a world of possibility for freedom, flexibility, and a life you'll love.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Work at Home Heroes podcast. I'm here today with Jennifer Thome, and she's a freelance translator and interpreter, also the founder of turnkeytranslator.com, an online school that teaches bilinguals of all academic backgrounds how to become freelance translators, interpreters, transcribers, and foreign language marketers. Super unique. Very excited to have you on the show. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Joining us from Chino Hills, California in the USA. Awesome. I love to interview people from all over the world. Interestingly enough, it seems that we're about half and half. We interview people who live outside the United States, and I love it. We have people inside the States as well. But it's just ironic when people ask me, like, can I make money at home not living in the US? I'm like, do people have problems where you live? And they're like, yeah. Do you have the internet where you live? How are we talking right now? And they're like, internet. And I'm like, so you have everything you need. You have problems and you have the internet and you have people and you have your brain. So you do have everything you need regardless of where you are. Even though Jennifer is in the US, I'm in the US, that doesn't mean that you outside the US listening to this podcast right now don't have everything you need to make money at home. So that's the cool part about working at home. So Jennifer, I'm really excited to have you on the show, and we're going to get into some details. Tell us a little bit more about your background. I mean, we're talking offline about how you got this idea of doing more interpreting and translation. So tell us that story.
I was actually born in Germany, and I know you've spent some time there. My mom's American, my dad's German. So I grew up bilingual. And then when I was in my undergraduate program, I found out that there was an honor society for language students. Only there were no Germans in it. It was all Chinese and Japanese students. There weren't that many Chinese students yet. And so I just hung out in the hallway and I would watch and see where all the Chinese were going because you couldn't find any information. And so I staked it out. I figured out where they were meeting and I showed up one day and I said, I want to be in this honor society too. And so that was my first exposure to Chinese. And about a month later, I was on a plane going to China because somebody said, well, you know, there's a German province in China. It's called Shandong. Well, there's a German city called Qingdao. You should go check it out. And so I went to my university and I said, I would like to have a grant to go to China and check it out. And they said, great. We can't find anybody who wants to go to China yet because it was so early, right? It was before the big China boom. And so I went to China and I fell absolutely in love with it and ended up spending the next 10 years living there.
Wow. So let me make sure I heard you correctly. You said there's a Chinese city that's German.
It was built by the Germans.
Built by the Germans, and it's called Qingdao?
Qingdao.
Okay. I was thinking that you were putting like an AU, like a German, because like in Brazil, they have a city called Blumenau and it's built by the Germans and it's a very German sounding name. And so I thought you'd said Qingdao, like
no.
Chingau, which would be totally politically incorrect if it were, it'd be funny too. I thought that's what you said. That's really, really cool. And so did you learn Chinese while you're there?
I did. I had to because it was so early and I went by myself. So I went for the summer and I came back. I loved it. So the moment I graduated college, I hopped on a plane and I went back.
That's amazing.
And I didn't go there on an expat package. So I didn't have money to pay for a fancy apartment in the embassy area where everybody speaks English. I lived at the Film Academy where the other international students were Korean or Japanese or European. So I had to learn. I had to learn to pay my electricity bill and my gas bill. And I had to learn how to order food. And I had to learn how to not have people laugh at me every day. So every day I learned something and I went to a few classes here and there. And it resulted in a master's degree eventually.
How many years ago was this?
So I went in 2000. And then I stayed there until 2005. And then I came back and I started my master's degree here, went back in 2006 because they figured out that while I was really good at Chinese, I really didn't know enough to be in a program yet. So they sent me back for a year to learn proper Chinese and, well, not proper Chinese, but to learn academics and grammar and how to do research because I could talk your ear off at that point because I had to. They're like, but you don't know any grammar. I said, no, of course not. I never learned grammar. So I did an intensive program. So that was in 2006, 2007. And then I went back in 2009.
Well, I dig it so much. Anybody who learns Mandarin, it's the number one most widely spoken language in the world because China has the largest population of any country in the world. So that's why, but you just kind of forget about that. And we think in the Western world that English is like the number, well, we're still number 3 We're the third most widely spoken language, English, the language in which you're listening to this podcast, until they figure out how to magically, translate podcasts into different languages. Spanish is the second one. I speak a little bit of Spanish. I don't know where German is on all this, but I can tell you that I haven't been there in 10 years and I haven't needed it for any reason. It's fun to listen to and talk and then speak in that language, but it is not serving me in any way really at the moment. And that's my choice. I could choose to have it serve me if I wanted to, but it's just not something that I'm feeling pushed towards. But there are people listening to this podcast that are being pushed towards something. They are bilingual, especially in the United States. We have a ton of bilingual people, especially as relates to English and Spanish. What kind of people do you interview? Like I was looking at your application, international thought leaders for magazine features or something. What other tasks do you do as a freelance interpreter and translator?
I do a lot of different things. It's a bit piecemeal, but I have some good clients now. So one client is a magazine and they need advertorials with international thought leaders. Some journalists don't want to do them because an advertorial is a form of advertising that looks like an article and they think that's beneath them.
Yeah, I've been seeing more and more of those and they're quite clever. I mean, it's a good way to add value while also holding people into the thing that will add even more value, the product that you're selling.
And what would you rather see? Would you rather see an advertisement that just says, hey, give us money? Or would you actually like to learn about the company, right? So yeah, I personally have no problem doing it. I don't need my name to be on it. And they pay really well. So one reason is that they don't want to do it because their name's not on it or it's an advertorial. The other reason is because it's international. So you have to work around their schedules. You have to be good with accents. 9 times out of 10, I interview them in English. But because they have a thick accent or because they might use some foreign words here and there, some journalists aren't comfortable with that. And I'm totally comfortable. I mean, even if it's Italian, I know nothing about Italian. I just write down what it sounds like and then I Google and I figure it out. That's one thing. And that's actually a writing job. I do more translation than I do writing because normally it pays better, but this pays usually $1.50 to $2 per word, which is a national magazine rate. So no complaints there. I also do some transcription here and there. Transcription is when somebody has interviews that they've recorded. And again, I get a lot of German, Chinese, and also some English with accents. Basically, you just sit there and you write down what's being said.
Yeah.
And that pays $30 to $40 an hour. Translation is my primary thing. And I do both translation for people in a one-on-one setting. So right now I'm working with a woman who was a nurse in China. And she wants to apply for a nursing license here. She's not comfortable doing that. So I sit with her and she pays me to just sit there and go through it with her line by line. And I'll say, well, this means this, and what's your answer? And then helping her translate her transcripts. I also do things like business contracts, historical documents. It can really be anything. And then interpretation I got into very recently after meeting a mom at a playground. This is my son's classmate's mom. She says, oh, your Chinese is so good. You should be a medical interpreter. And I said, no way. That's way too much pressure, right? You have to know everything and you have to have a medical degree. And she goes, no, just talk to my boss. I think you'll be fine. And so I did a trial interpretation with them and they send you the file and you just learn the words beforehand. I went in and it was totally fine. You learn the words you need to know. And the rest is, 90% of it is just communicating general meanings. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. You should follow up in this amount of time. With translation, this is the big thing that I teach in my course is so many people are scared to get into it. And I was scared to get into it for a long time and call myself a professional translator because I never felt like I was enough of an expert. I'm not a native speaker. I don't have a PhD. And so I always worried I wouldn't do a good enough job. But it's really just a big puzzle, right? So if you have a basic grasp of it, everything else you can figure out. I have done ballistics reports. I'm actually better at doing ballistics reports, which I have no background in, than doing history, which I do have background in, because it's so straightforward.
I think that you've really niched down. And I also like that you just kind of went for it and you didn't have to understand how everything was going to work before you just figured it out. And I think that's something that we talk about in this podcast a lot, that it pulls people back when they try to figure out how everything is going to work before they ever do any of the work. And so they need to understand how step 58 works before they do step 1. And step 1 might be very glaringly obvious in front of them. It might be something as simple as making one phone call or sending an email or enrolling in a course or something very simple, easy, really. But until they understand how step 58 and every step in between is going to work, they won't even take step 1. When they don't realize is that it's kind of like a staircase and that step 58 doesn't even exist yet, right?
Absolutely.
You have to build your staircase. So you're building step 1 by taking that action, by taking the next action, that's step 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And by the time you get to step 58, you're gonna be like, oh, that wasn't that big of a deal. But you decided what your step 58 was. And there's no way that anybody can tell you even what step 58 is. And it's just such a proverbial thing I always use. I don't know why I'm stuck on the number 58, but I always do. And that staircase is going to appear as soon as you build it. It's not going to appear any sooner than that. And so I actually did translation work when I was in Germany for a year, 10 years ago. I took classes in German English translation. And I think I did a little bit of like side hustling stuff with it. Like at school, I would translate transcripts from German universities to American universities. And I did just a little bit of it. It wasn't something that super lit me up, but I could totally see it as being something more fruitful, like proofreading became, because I was also proofreading for a lot of German people when I lived in Germany. But proofreading just came easier for me. And I kind of think back to my mindset back then. Like if I met somebody like you, back then I would have been like, oh, maybe I'll do some more with German translation. I just never really did much with it. I think there was probably some fear around it because I always had fun, but everything happens for a reason. So I know I'm talking to you at the right time right now. Yeah.
Oh, no. And I was going to say, when you first start out, it's hard work and you have to get into a groove of doing it. I mean, there are things that could go wrong. There are things that are challenging. And I think like every skill, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes.
And if you're not freaked out a little bit, if you're not nervous, if you're not scared, then you're not doing anything meaningful. Because if you weren't shaking up your life a little bit, then you wouldn't be doing anything that would change your life. And so if you don't want to feel nervous or that excitement or that even that overwhelm, if you don't want to feel those things, then do you really want a different life than you have now? If you really just want to stay without those feelings, then stay exactly where you are, because that's exactly what you're going to get. It's like mundane, boredom, dissatisfaction. Like choose your negative feelings. Wouldn't you rather feel a little bit of a fear, a little bit of overwhelm rather than boredom and dissatisfaction with your life? You've got to make that choice. So we get into how you got to do what you're doing and all the cool things you're doing now, but what did your life look like before all that happened? Who were you? Do you have kids? I don't know how old you are. Like, I don't really ask people that question anyway, because I don't think it matters, but I know that people wonder because they like to potentially think about, okay, well, it helps them bust excuses. If you've got kids, that kind of thing.
I do have kids. I call them my little people. I am 36 years old. I'm okay sharing that. I have 2 kids. I had a 2-year-old when I quit my job, and he was the number one reason that I quit my job. When I left, actually, I found out that I was pregnant with my second child. So that was a little nerve-wracking, but it was also a really positive thing, because here's what my life looked like before I left and went out on my own. I would leave the house at 6:45 every morning. I would have a very brief drive through some beautiful mountains with grazing cows and then slug my way through LA traffic for anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half to get to the office by 8:30. And then I would sit in a cubicle in a warehouse with no windows. And my boss's restroom was right in front of my cubicle. And he would just go in there and make meetings. And so he would just like sit on the pot. And I hope he's not listening to this. And so I really hated my life. And then I would come home on a good day by 7:00 and hang out with my son, who was already completely exhausted from having a long day. And so I didn't have energy. He didn't have energy. I was making 6 figures, and that was amazing. And I had a really respectable job, but it wasn't a good life, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew I had to make the decision and be brave and decide that I was going to make my money in a different way, because I couldn't keep doing that. I couldn't keep coming home to this little cranky human who needed his mom to be there and justifying it by saying, well, I make good money. I have okay health insurance. I have prestige. It just wasn't the right decision.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. There's so many people that are like, just be happy you have a job. And that's how they cope with how miserable they are at that said job. And so part of our mission, and you're helping with that mission by being on the show and talking about this with me, is waking people up to, hey, you actually have way more control over your income than you think. Mm-hmm. And you have all of the control. You can write your own income story by choosing to flip the switch in your mind away from believing that somebody else has the control, that making money is about getting a job or making money about what education you have. No, making money is not about any of those things. It's not even about you at all. It's about solving other people's problems. And it's not a novel concept. Like, this is not new. It's new to me, actually, within the last few years of my own online business, that I've flipped the switch for myself. And I've seen what it's done for my own business. I've seen what it's done for my students' businesses. People that aren't even my students that have come to me and said, because of the way you said that, hey, making money is not about me, I changed the way I approach my business. And I stopped thinking about all the things that I'm scared of. And I started thinking about all the things that are frustrating the people I want to help. And then I figured out how to solve those problems and use the information that they gave me to improve my own skill set so I could solve bigger problems for them. And guess what? When I solve bigger problems, I make more money. And the same is true for all of us, right? And so it doesn't matter if you have the internet right now, if you have the ability to answer an email, then you have a skill that you could sell to somebody else who needs that skill. There's so many people like me, business owners, that you might have never heard of that need help with email. I was just listening to another podcast this morning, and I don't want to bombard her with people emailing. She mentioned, I need help with email. And so like, that's just like an example. Like, if you have a skill, as simple, we don't even think of it as skills, but everything is a skill. Dealing with fear is a skill, and it gets easier the more you do it.
Absolutely.
Marketing is a skill. Translation, interpretation, all those things are skills. We think of those as skills. Those are easy to think of as skills, but the mindset stuff takes practice. You can't think, oh, making money is not about me one time and have it change your life. You can't think anything that you've not been used to thinking, because we get in the habits, right? The things that we believe about ourselves or what's possible for ourselves are simply habits that we've taught to ourselves, like, hey, nobody's going to want to hear what I have to say, or nobody's going to want to hire me, or, I never have money for conferences. I had somebody tell me that recently, like, oh, hey, Caitlin, if you put on an online event, not an online event, a live event, as in not online, I asked people, would they come? And somebody said, well, I never have money for conferences. I'm like, okay, would that be true in 2 years when I put on the conference? Like, you realize how much control you have over this, right? So if you're saying this statement about yourself, like, I can't work at home, I never have money for conferences, nobody's going to want to hire me, there's already too many people out there doing what I want to do. Like, those are choices. Those are habits that you are believing are true about yourself still, and you don't realize yet. And I hope that you're realizing it now, that if you can choose to believe that crap, you can choose to believe the truth too.
That is so true.
You have the same amount of power. You have the same amount of power to believe the truth, or you can believe a lie. Cool thing is, if you choose to believe the truth, you get a lot of energy out of that. You get a lot of momentum out of that. You get a lot of confidence out of that. But if you choose to spend your energy believing a lie, then it's going to zap your energy. It's going to zap your confidence. And so Jennifer and I are talking about making that mindset switch. And it's just something I'm flowing with right now. And so I'm hoping that somebody at home is listening and is realizing that, hey, you got kids at home. That's not an excuse, but you maybe have been using your kids as an excuse. Was there a time, Jennifer, for you where you had an obstacle and you used it as a reason to not get started?
Well, of course. I had a family. I have a mortgage. I've got all these responsibilities. My husband's an entrepreneur, so his income is not reliable. And the money that we do have usually gets invested into his projects, and then they may work or they may not work. So it's super nerve-wracking. And then there was my own hangups about, well, I'm not a native speaker. I have to compete with this massive pool of Chinese translators. There's a billion of them. And so I kept on making excuses, but then I realized those excuses were protecting me from the fear of trying something new. And I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten was from a friend, because I worked as a writer before that. And I said, I made the transition from writing to translating because it pays better per hour. Because with writing, there's so much research and pitching and waiting and following up that sometimes your hourly rate, unless you really get in a good groove, it just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And he said, Jen, you're being really lazy. And I said, I'm not lazy. I'm working all the time. And I was so defensive. And he says, no, you're too lazy to overcome your own fear. He goes, if you want to be a writer, if you want to be a creative, just go and do it. I said, oh, yeah, like I can work hard. And so many people work hard, and we show up at this office and we have the long commutes and all the drama that goes on at work. And I remember this so vividly. It was raining the day that I left, which it never rains in LA, right? And I was so excited. So I got in the parking lot and I called my friend Julie to tell her what had happened. And her husband picked up. He said, well, she's not home. And I never talked to her husband. I go, well, I'm just calling to tell her that I'm done. And even he was jumping up and down cheering. Like, that's how miserable I'd been. But I had been too lazy to sit down, do the research, make a plan, and then just go for it and be confident and then be willing to work hard even when it got uncomfortable.
And kind of connecting that, the being too lazy to take action part, back to what we were just talking about, what are you choosing to give your energy and attention to? And I am guilty of this too, Jennifer. I actually just caught myself last night talking and thinking about, hey, this needs to get done. This needs to get done. This needs to get done. This one thing that was just kind of haunting me, sitting in the back of my mind, just staring at me from the corner. And I was talking about it. I'm like, wait a second. What if I took the same energy that I was using to talk about why I wasn't doing the thing and how it needs to get done and actually did it? And I just got this burst of energy just from that thought to just go and do the thing. And I set my timer because I wanted to be curious to see how long. I got through 2/3 of, it was a 60-page document that I had to read. And I got through 40 pages before my power went out. We were in a storm. And in an hour, I got through 2/3 of what I was going to do in an hour because I probably spent so much time talking about it, way more than I would have spent just doing it. And what happens when we do the things that we're lazy about, right? The things that we're lazy about overcoming, including the fear, when we take the time to combat those, take action against those things, like taking action even though we're scared, doing the thing that we say we don't do or can't do, like actually figuring that out, we are rewarded with momentum.
Exactly.
Because that's how we get momentum, is through taking action. And I'm not great at math or science, but I know that there's a law of physics that says that something that's not moving ain't going to move unless you push it, And so you've got to take action. And that's the definition of momentum. And I can't give you the scientific definition, but you're not going to get momentum unless you start moving.
Right.
And I say it a different way a lot. And you don't get traction without action, because people use that word with me and they say, I want to get some traction and then I'll start doing some stuff. I'm like, nope, you're not going to get the traction until you actually do the stuff. Like, you're not going to get traction anyway before you start taking action. So you mentioned, making more money. And I realized we hadn't even asked that question. And I know people are wondering, what kind of income are you generating doing your skills at home, Jennifer?
I earn between $2,000 to $5,000 a month now.
That is life-changing money.
That is life-changing money. And the thing is, it's not full-time work, because I made the decision that I wanted to work around my family, at least until they're older, right? Once they're older and they're teenagers, then I'll probably want to work more so I can avoid all the teenage drama.
Yeah.
But for now that they're young, I want to work around them, not figure out where to do laundry and dishes and kids and personal, things around my work. So that's in about anywhere between 3 to 8 hours a day. And I make my own schedule.
I mean, that's living the dream right there. Most people come to me and they think they want money, but when we dig a little deeper, they realize, no, I just want to be home with my little girl. I want to be home with my kids and be able to prioritize my lifestyle instead of making it all about the boss, right?
Exactly.
Having to ask permission to go to the bathroom or take a dentist appointment in the middle of the day, or just, needing to get groceries, not after work, just things like that. That's what we really want. We want that freedom and flexibility. I call freedom my favorite F word, really. And then fear is my least favorite F word. Like, it's all about the F words, right? We have F words on this podcast, guys. So, I mean, your life is awesome now. You get to wake up 6 o'clock. You're still waking up with your kids. And I'm actually got your application open in front of me just because we're running out of time and I want to make sure we cover all these things. And then, of course, ask the question that everybody is waiting for at the end of this podcast. I guess I want to get into that because I don't want that to feel rushed. But we always talk about my least favorite F word, and that's fear. There's people that listen to this podcast and they're waiting for that thing that's going to make them move, and they don't realize it's them, right? Mm-hmm. They don't realize they're the ones that are going to have to move, right? The whole momentum thing, that you don't get that without movement. You don't get traction without action. But I always ask all of our podcast guests to speak to those people that are at home and everything they've heard on this podcast. Maybe they've shut us off by now and they're taking action because we pushed them and they did it and whatever. But there's people that are not moving at all right now. And they're thinking, oh, well, I can't speak Chinese. I can't do this. Like, I don't live in the US. Like, there are all these different excuses, reasons for not starting that people are still giving themselves.
Yeah. And the reason I designed the course actually was because I redid my kitchen. I had worked really hard. I saved up the money. And the handyman that we work with doesn't speak English. He has somebody on his team who speaks English and he translates, but he was out. So he brought his son. And this kid is 17 and he's a much better interpreter than I am. He's got great eye contact and he's fluent and he's a native speaker in both languages. And I asked him what he wanted to do after he graduates high school. He said, well, I don't really know how to do anything. So I think I'll probably just go learn to be an electrician, which is, it's a great profession. But said, you could also consider working in the languages. And he had never even thought about it because he doesn't come from a quote unquote educated family. And I said, well, you don't have to. My dad didn't come from an educated family and he rose really high in the ranks of the German military. He's a researcher. He's the head scientist. So it doesn't matter where you come from. And you don't have to make the full jump right away. So what I always teach people is set a bottom line, like know your numbers. If you need X amount to live on, figure out how much you need, figure out how much your food costs, figure out how much your housing costs, figure out how much you need to make every month, and then start working in that field. Maybe it's just doing an hour of work in that field a day. Maybe it's taking an odd job. I took jobs randomly because they were needed in my community. We have a lot of Chinese here in LA. So they would need help. And that's how I got my start. And so I started to see, okay, I can make $40 an hour. And my bottom line is I need to earn about $100 a day for me to pay my crazy California mortgage and to take care of my needs. Anything I earn above that is fantastic, but that's what I need to survive. And so once I got a little bit of experience and I saw, hey, this actually works and I can get word of mouth, and the other thing is don't be afraid of what people think of you. Because if you don't tell people that you have this skill or that you're doing this thing, then how are they going to hire you?
Exactly. It's not like it used to be where you'd be able to just put up a sign on the road and people will just find you. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Yeah, it's so saturated. So just go to your friends and family and say, hey, I'm starting a side business doing marketing or making these little potted plants arrangements or whatever it is that you do. And say, if you know anybody who has a need, please put them in touch with me.
Yep.
And you'd be surprised how much business comes from that because people who know you tend to like you. They want to help you. And I got one of my best clients, and I felt like I had such imposter syndrome in the beginning because again, I have a degree, but I'm not as good as my classmates, right? I worked really hard to get through my degree. And I just said, okay, well, I just left my 6-figure marketing job. What am I going to do with myself? And I met this woman at the playground. And she asked me, what do you do? And I said, I do translation and localization. And it turns out that we've actually worked for the same company in similar positions, right? So she was in the sales and I was in the marketing. So we were pretty close. And she goes, oh, great. I'm looking for freelancers. She sat me down and she actually became my best client. But she was also the one who told me it's okay for you to ask for money to do these things.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Even though you don't feel like you're qualified yet, which you are. Figure out what the rate is. You don't have to discount yourself because when you do, you're sending the message that your services aren't on par, right? So just set a rate, figure out how much you need. Again, figure out how much does your life cost? How much do you need to set aside? How much can you work? Then do the math and figure out how much you should charge per hour and ask for it.
Yep.
And some people will say no, and that's fine.
Yeah.
She's in sales. So she's 90% of the people I talk to say no to me before they even listen to me. And that's okay because 10% pays more than my salary.
So what I'm pulling out of this advice as we wrap this up is that, take things slowly. You don't have to go whole hog. And I liken it back to when you think about what people do in the beginning of the year when they want to lose weight, right? Or they want to pay off debt. They just we'll use losing weight as the most prominent example is that people just go all or nothing with it. And they don't realize that it's probably better if you start small and make very small sustainable changes and just keep doing that. And that is my strategy. I never diet. I exercise only to feel good, not to lose weight. And I have lost a few pounds over the long term and just doing that. I've been feeling amazing. And so what would happen, guys, if you're listening to this right now, if you did that, if you started doing one thing a little bit differently, one thing to build your skill, if you spent 5-10 minutes reading a book that would shift your perspective, even if you spent one day a week listening to this podcast, new episode every Monday, what if you did that? What if you just did one thing differently and that was completely able to fit into your life and just watch what happens? And then the second thing I pulled out of that is to stop waiting for somebody else to give you permission. And I kind of stumbled across this in my mindset training and just probably 3 or 4 years ago. We don't ever get this notification on our Facebook page when we turn 18 or 21 or whatever, that it's okay to make our own decisions. We look outside for approval still. And I think that is ingrained in us growing up. We have to get a permission slip to go on the field trip. We have to have a giant block to take to the bathroom. We have to ask permission 2 weeks ahead of time to get time off of work. That permission pattern continues with us. And there's never anybody that says, hey, you don't need that anymore. Well, guess what? Now you have that permission. Give yourself permission, hire yourself, fire the notion that you need somebody else to give you a job. know that you can create your own career. My career didn't even exist when I was born. It didn't exist 4 years ago. I created that stuff myself, and you can do the exact same thing. Well, Jennifer, I want to say thank you so much. We've tagged you in Work at Home Heroes Facebook group. There is a thread specifically for this podcast episode where you can go and talk to Jennifer. There's links in the show notes on the website for this episode as well. So if you found us through an email, you're on that page. You can get a full transcript of this too, and all the links for Jennifer's website. Where can people find you? I want to make sure that you get a little shameless plug here at the end of the episode, Jennifer.
So the website is turnkeytranslator.com.
Cool. So you can head over there. We've got links in the show notes as well. We can get more from Jennifer, and of course, join us in the Work at Home Heroes Facebook group to talk about the episode. Thanks again so much for being on the show, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thanks, guys. I sure hope you're enjoying the Work at Home Heroes podcast. I sure enjoy hosting it. I would love it if you'd leave us a review if you've been enjoying it. And of course, you are all invited to join the Work at Home Heroes Facebook community, where we will continue the conversation about working at home and finding your fit. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Work at Home Heroes podcast with Caitlin Pyle. Be sure to listen to previous episodes at caitlinpyle.co/podcast. While you're there, read the show notes and check out all the great links and resources mentioned in this episode and more. You can also subscribe to the Work at Home Heroes podcast so you'll automatically be notified when our next episode is available. Remember, as Caitlin says, mo skills means mo money.